All right, let's dive deep into the history of psychology. Now, if you're preparing for the UPSC Psychology Optional, you already know that understanding the why behind the theories is every bit as important as the what. So in this explainer, we're going to trace the incredible story of how we've tried to understand the human mind, from its philosophical soul all the way to the modern synapse. Let's get right into it.
So, here's our game plan. We're going to start way back with psychology's roots in philosophy and then watch how it transformed into a real science. After that, we'll explore the great schools of thought that really define the field, witness the mind's big comeback in the cognitive revolution, and then pivot to the unique journey of psychology right here in India. And finally, we'll wrap up by looking at where the field is headed today. This whole structure is designed to help you build a really clear, logical narrative for your exam answers.
You know, our story doesn't begin in a lab with white coats and brain scanners. Nope. It starts in the minds of ancient thinkers. Long before psychology was even a word, philosophers in Greece, Europe, and India were wrestling with these huge questions. What even is the mind? How do we know anything for sure? What does it mean to be, well, us? These big philosophical debates really laid the foundation for everything that was to come.
I think, therefore I am. Wow. With just these few words, René Descartes basically throws down the gauntlet and puts consciousness right at the center of everything. He argued that the mind, this thinking thing, and the body, the physical stuff, were two totally separate entities that somehow interacted. He called this interactive dualism, and it kicked off the famous mind-body problem that, honestly, we're still debating today. It's a foundational concept you just have to know.
Okay, so this is a classic showdown that you'll see pop up again and again in psychology. On one side, you've got Plato and the rationalists. They believe that knowledge is innate, that we're basically born with it and just have to uncover it through reason. You can totally see the seeds of cognitive psychology here. And on the other side, you've got Aristotle and the empiricists. They argue the mind is a tabula rasa, a blank slate, and everything we know comes from our experiences. And that right there is the philosophical backbone of behaviorism. This tension is absolutely central to the field's history. Now, what's really fascinating is that while all this was going on in the West, ancient Indian thought was developing its own incredibly sophisticated model of the mind, called the antakarana. It's this beautiful cognitive architecture with four parts: manas, which is like the sensory processor; buddhi, the intellect that makes decisions; ahamkara, which is the ego, or our sense of I; and finally chitta, the deep reservoir of memory. For your exams, just use the mnemonic MABC, manas, ahamkara, buddhi, chitta, to keep these four functions straight.
So, how did psychology go from being this philosophical armchair debate to a real science? Well, the 19th century was the turning point. It was the moment psychology basically put on a lab coat. A new wave of thinkers who were trained as physicists and physiologists started asking, hey, what if we could measure the mind? This was a revolutionary idea, and it changed the game completely.
And this right here, this was a bombshell. Hermann von Helmholtz actually measured the speed of a nerve impulse. By doing that, he proved that our thoughts aren't instantaneous. They aren't some magical spiritual event. No, they are physical processes that take time. This discovery was huge because it meant mental processes could be scientifically studied, which is the whole basis of cognitive psychology today.
Then along comes Gustav Fechner, who takes it a step further. He creates this whole new field called psychophysics. And the crucial point here is that with his famous law, S equals K log R, he created the first ever quantitative law in psychology. He proved that you could objectively measure the relationship between a physical stimulus, like the brightness of a light, and our subjective experience of it. The inner world, it turned out, was measurable.
Okay, so once the scientific foundation was laid, the floodgates just burst open. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were this incredible, chaotic, and creative period where all these competing schools of thought popped up. Each one had a totally different vision for what psychology should be. It was like a battle royale of ideas to define this new science.
This timeline really shows you that rapid-fire evolution. You can see this dialectical shift happening. One school emerges, and almost immediately another one rises up to challenge it. It's this constant action and reaction. Understanding this progression is absolutely key for structuring your historical answers in the exam.
Now let's look at the first big rivalry: structuralism versus functionalism. And by the way, this comparison is frequently asked in the psychology optional. Think of it like this. Structuralism was like an anatomist. It wanted to dissect consciousness and ask, what is the mind made of? But functionalism was more like an evolutionary biologist. It asked a totally different question. What is the mind for? How does it help us survive and adapt?
Okay, quick pause for you to think.
The answer? It was all about purpose. Functionalism asked about the adaptive function of our consciousness, something structuralism just wasn't interested in. It wasn't just about the what, it was about the why.
So, while those two schools were duking it out, three other movements appeared and just fundamentally shook everything up. You had Freud's psychoanalysis, which dove deep into the unseen world of the unconscious. Then there was behaviorism, which basically said, forget the mind, we can only study what we can see. And then you had Gestalt psychology, which came in with this beautiful idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Three totally different ways of looking at us.
For decades, behaviorism really ruled the roost, especially in America. The mind was treated like this irrelevant black box. But then, in the 1960s, the mind made a dramatic comeback. This was the cognitive revolution, and it was sparked by a powerful new metaphor, the computer.
A landmark moment in this revolution was this simple paper by George Miller. He discovered the magic number, 7 plus or minus 2. It's the capacity of our short-term memory. Now, this seems simple, right? But it was a huge blow to behaviorism. It demonstrated that there were objective, quantifiable limits to our internal mental processes, the very thing behaviorism said we couldn't study.
This is the model that changed everything. People started thinking of the mind as software running on the hardware of the brain. There's input, there's processing, and there's output. This information processing model, along with Noam Chomsky's devastating critique of Skinner's theory of language, firmly put cognition back on the map as the central topic of psychology. The mind was back.
All right, let's bring our focus home and track the unique story of psychology in India. This is a really important journey of a discipline moving from basically imitating the West to finding its own indigenous voice. This trajectory is a vital theme, especially for Paper 2.
So if you trace this path, it starts with the first department at Calcutta University back in 1915. After independence, there was this long imitation phase. But then, in the 1970s, the psychologist Durganand Sinha famously declared a crisis of relevance. People started asking, are these Western theories really helping us understand Indian society? And that question sparked the whole movement towards indigenization.
So what is indigenization? It's the push to develop psychological theories and methods that are born from a specific cultural context. It's not about just translating a test from English to Hindi. It's about building a psychology from the ground up that speaks to the local reality. You can conceptually link this with the weird critique we'll talk about in a moment. Indigenization was an early recognition that Western psychology wasn't necessarily universal psychology.
And that brings us right up to today. Psychology in the 21st century is this incredibly dynamic field. It's all about integration, new technologies, and a healthy dose of critical self-awareness. The old silos are breaking down, and things are getting really interesting.
Now this slide, this is a powerful visual. WEIRD stands for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. And get this, something like 96% of all subjects in psychology studies come from these countries, which represent only about 12% of the world's population. It forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. Is what we call human psychology really just the psychology of a small, very unusual minority of people?
So where's the field going? Well, you've got these major trends. Cognitive neuroscience is literally mapping the brain's connections. We've discovered neuroplasticity, the idea that our brains physically change with experience. You have positive psychology shifting the focus to well-being and human flourishing, and critical psychology, which questions the power structures within the field itself. By the way, these trends are fantastic enrichment points you can use in your 250-word answers to show you're up to date.
So, if there's one big theme for today's psychology, it's synthesis. The crucial point is that we're finally moving past all those old arguments. We're blending the universalism of neuroscience with the contextual understanding of cultural psychology. The quest continues, bringing everything together from ancient ideas of the soul to our modern understanding of the synapse.
Look, I know this is a lot to take in. So for your exam preparation, we've put together some really detailed, high-yield notes and a visual mind map to help you revise all these concepts effectively. The link is right there for you in the description below.
We'll leave you with this one final thought to ponder as you continue your preparation. This whole journey began with the soul and has now arrived at the synapse. My question to you is, in gaining all this scientific precision, has psychology maybe lost some of its original, deeper meaning? It's something worth thinking about.